Hello, it's Concord Wind. I didn't feel right not preaching a sermon today. So, opened up God's words and I found a chapter that I might. Oh, excuse me, 1 second. All right, I'm back. So, my neighbor came over and was asking me to play the song that I wrote for my other neighbor that passed away. It doesn't have a title. Well, I guess technically it has a title. It's March 19th, 2026 is the title, which is the day that I found out my neighbor had passed away. Or I think might have been the night before I found out. Anyways, I'm going to read God's word. We were all kind of choking up, kind of crying a little bit listening to that. But anyways, let's read God's words. Oh, and by the way, the song is not available. It's a private song. It's unlisted, so it's only people with the link to the video can see it. So you can leave some of your contact information in the comments if you want to hear it. But, I think most people probably just want to hear God's words, so let's get to it. If man's heart is an enmity to God, how can man fear God and shun evil? Since the people of today do not possess the same humanity as Job, what of their nature and essence and their attitude toward God? Do they fear God? Do they shun evil? Those who do not fear God or shun evil can only be summed up with 3 words: enemies of God. You often say these 3 words, but you have never known their real meaning. The words enemies of God have essence. They are not saying that God sees man as the enemy, but that man sees God as the enemy. First, when people begin to believe in God, which of them does not have their own aims, motivations, and ambitions? Even though one part of them believes in the existence of God and has seen the existence of God, their belief in God still contains those motivations, and their ultimate aim in believing in God is to receive His blessings and the things they want. In people's life experiences, they often think to themselves, I've given up my family and career for God, and what has He given me? I must add it up and confirm it. Have I received any blessings recently? I've given a lot during this time. I've run and have suffered much. Has God given me any promises in return? Has He remembered my good deeds? What will my end be? Can I receive God's blessings? I mean, that is a preposterous take. Every person constantly makes such calculations within their heart, and they make demands of God which bear their motivations, ambitions, and transactional mentality. This is to say, in his heart, man is constantly testing God, constantly devising plans about God, constantly arguing the case for his own individual end with God, and trying to extract a statement from God, seeing whether or not God can give him what he wants. At the same time as pursuing God, man does not treat God as God. Man has always tried to make deals with God, ceaselessly making demands of him, and even pressing him at every step, trying to take a mile after being given an inch. At the same time as trying to make deals with God, man also argues with him, and there are even people who, when trials befall them or they find themselves in certain situations, often become weak, passive, and slack in their words, and full of complaints about God. By the way, that reminds me, last night, I was feeling very weak myself, actually. I was just kind of in a bad mood, a little depressed, which is unusual for me, But I didn't give up on my duty, I didn't become passive. Like I opened up FL Studio, worked on a beat, and I hope I don't lose my place. Oh, we'll just reread at that point. So yeah, I worked on a beat and then processed it, added lyrics, wrote my own lyrics, wrote the beat, and just had Suno do the vocals. But I even used my voice in the vocals. I used a sample of my voice for Suno to process, and which I can do different voices. I can do different voices, and all different voices. So whatever. I mean, I can do all kinds of different voices. So if my music starts to sound like I'm, just using a bunch of different voices, I mean, it's because I can do a lot of different voices, and I've used a lot of different samples of different accents and different tones and pitches, frequencies, whatever. Um, so, my music is pretty diverse. All right, God says, at the same time as trying to make deals with God, man also argues with him. There are even people who, when trials befall them or they find themselves in certain situations, often become weak, passive, and slack in their work and full of complaints about God. From the time when man first began to believe in God, he has considered God to be a cornucopia, a Swiss Army knife, and he has considered himself to be God's greatest creditor, as if trying to get blessings and promises from God were his inherent right and obligation, while God's responsibility were to protect and care for man and to provide for him. Such is the basic understanding of belief in God of all those who believe in God, and such is their deepest understanding of the concept of belief in God. From man's nature and essence to his subjective pursuit, there is nothing that relates to the fear of God. Man's aim in believing in God cannot possibly have anything to do with the worship of God. That is to say, man has never considered nor understood that belief in God requires fearing and worshiping God. In light of such conditions, man's essence is obvious. What is this essence? It is that man's heart is malicious, harbors treachery and deceit, does not love fairness and righteousness and that which is positive, and it is contemptible and greedy. Man's heart cannot be more closed to God. He has not given it to God at all. God has never seen man's true heart, nor has he ever been worshipped by man. No matter how great the price God pays, or how much work he does, or how much he provides to man, man remains blind and utterly indifferent to it all. Man has never given his heart to God. He only wants to mind his heart himself, to make his own decisions, the subtext of which is that man does not want to follow the way of fearing God and shunning evil, or to obey the sovereignty and arrangements of God, nor does he want to worship God as God. Such is the state of man today. Now let us look again at Job. First of all, did he do a deal with God? Did he have any ulterior motives in holding firm to the way of fearing God and shunning evil? At that time, had God spoken to anyone of the end to come? At that time, God had not made promises to anyone about the end, and it was against this background, that Job was able to fear God and shun evil. Do the people of today stand up to comparison with Job? There's too much of a disparity. They are in different leagues. Although Job did not have much knowledge of God, he had given his heart to God and it belonged to God. He never did a deal with God and had no extravagant desires or demands toward God. Instead, he believed that Jehovah gave and Jehovah has taken away. This was what he had seen and obtained from holding true to the way of fearing God and shunning evil during many years of life. Likewise, he had also gained the outcome represented in the words, "Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil?" These two sentences were what he had seen and come to know as a result of his attitude of obedience toward God during his life's experiences, and they were also his most powerful weapons with which he triumphed during Satan's temptations, and they were the foundation of his standing firm in testimony to God. At this point, do you envisage Job as a lovely person? Do you hope to be such a person? Do you fear having to undergo the temptations of Satan? Do you resolve to pray for God to subject you to the same trials as Job? Without doubt, most people would not dare to pray for such things. It is evident, then, that your faith is pitiably small. Compared to Job, your faith is simply unworthy of mention. You are the enemies of God. You do not fear God. You are incapable of standing firm in your testimony to God, and you are unable to triumph over the attacks, accusations, and temptations of Satan. What makes you qualified to receive the promises of God? Having heard the story of Job and understood God's intention in saving man and the meaning of the salvation of man, do you now have the faith to accept the same trials as Job? Should you not have a little resolve to allow yourselves to follow the way of fearing God and shunning evil? Amen. Beautiful passage. Although it's eye-opening and it's judgment, even though this is on knowing God, you have to remember God's judgment is sprinkled throughout all volumes of the Word appears in the flesh. Doesn't matter what volume you pick up, there's bound to be some judgment somewhere. This book is mostly education, but it's got judgment as well, obviously, as we just read. Because it is a judgment. When you compare yourself to Job, you're judged. Although now when I compare myself to Job, I receive affirmation instead of judgment because I do want to submit to God's arrangements. I do pray for trials to come upon me. I do pray for suffering to come upon me, hardships to come upon me, blessings to come upon me, grace to come upon me, all according to God's will, not as I will, but as he will. I am ready to accept all that God gives me and all that God takes away from me. So these words have an effect. These words we were just reading, God's words have an effect. They will turn you into a person like Job, if that's your desire. And Job is a big inspiration for me. But some people prefer to be like Peter. And Peter's an inspiration to me too, but Job is probably a bigger inspiration, to be honest. Even though Peter was better than Job, we don't get the details of Peter's suffering. So I didn't get to see the extent of Peter's testimony, but I've seen the extent of Job's testimony, and that's why Job's testimony speaks louder to me. So yeah, anyways, that's it. Thanks so much for watching. God bless and goodbye.